Hi everyone, and a very warm welcome to this episode of the Learning Journeys podcast from Lacuna Learning. Thank you so much everyone for listening and subscribing. Always delighted to see how many people tune in and listen to what we've produced, so just thank you very much for doing that. We hope you're all keeping really, really well just now. Today, I am thrilled to be joined by double Paralympic medalist and Paralympic Champion sailor, Helena Lucas MBE. Often I know the guests really, really well. I don't know Helena particularly well. We were introduced through our mutual friend and colleague Laurie McDonald, who's a Scottish coach developer. She's done some great work. She's from sailing, works with a number of different sports, and she was chatting to Helena one day and said, Doug, I've got a brilliant guest for you. So I'm really, really excited to learn a bit more about her journey. I do a bit of work as a coach developer in sailing. I'm not from that sport, so I'm pretty excited to learn a bit more about sailing as well, but really just to get into this journey and see where it leads us. So thank you so much for your time, Helena.
My pleasure, Doug.
Okay, so by way of warming us up today, the regular feature on the podcast, if you could go on an adventure anywhere in the world, where would you go? Who would you go with? And what would you do? I'm very intrigued to see where a professional sailor wants to go on their adventure.
Well, right now, I think Auckland, New Zealand is on my bucket list. I've always wanted to go to New Zealand, never have. Been to Australia quite a few times, obviously kind of with the Sydney Olympics in 2000. So before that, went out quite often training. I've had world championships out in Australia and never, ever, ever been to New Zealand. And I think, obviously, we had the America's Cup only sort of a few weeks ago, and that certainly whetted my appetite. But a friend of mine from uni actually came from Auckland, so it's bonkers that I never got around to actually going and visiting him. But that is definitely right here, right now, that is where I'd want to go. I'd probably have to take my husband, otherwise he'd be a little bit upset. So yeah, I'd go with my husband. And this sounds so sad, doesn't it? The activity we'd end up doing is sailing. Because believe it or not, I think that's the beauty about our sport, is there's so many different aspects to it. It's not, yes, you can go racing, you go to the Olympics, you could do the America's Cup, but also the cruising side of it is just absolutely brilliant. And you discover places that are, you just wouldn't get to by land, the beautiful little bays and coves and stuff like that. So yeah, it would have to be, the activity would have to be sailing. I would also like to go skiing though, because my friend Mike used to tell me that the skiing used to be pretty cool, and you could go literally in the winter. You could be up the mountain skiing and then down at the coast sailing. Morning skiing, afternoon sailing. So I couldn't think of anything better.
Oh, it's great. I was hoping for something as good as that, and I predicted sailing would feature, but I didn't presume. How would you get there? Would you sail to New Zealand to get there?
Not right now, not with COVID. I mean, interestingly enough, one of the things again on our bucket list, my husband Steve and me, is we would at some point like to sail around the world. That is definitely on our bucket list. So absolutely, at some point it would be really, really cool to sail to New Zealand. That would be, and obviously doing many, many, many stops along the way. But yeah, that's certainly another thing that's on our bucket list. But I'd be quite keen to just jump on an airplane right now and just fly out there, just to get there and have that first experience. And then it'd be amazing to actually sail our boat there. Would be pretty cool. That would be a really good achievement, and definitely something that we're dreaming about and aspiring to.
Yeah, well, obviously for the purposes of the podcast, there are no COVID restrictions in place, so you can sail as much as you want and go wherever you want. But around the world trip, I just had a feeling you might say that you just go this. Yeah, I don't have a huge background in sailing, but I did do one very long trip down the Red Sea, so there's a great joy to those long expeditions and stuff. And the various places that you end up along the way. So New Zealand's Auckland. There you go. You heard it here first, everyone. That's where she would go. Okay, I'm getting the sense of a lifetime on the water, a lifetime in sailing. Could we maybe go back to the beginning? Where did sailing begin for you?
Gosh, I mean, I guess. Well, my parents got me into sailing, so I think my dad got into it first. And again, I grew up in Surrey, in a little village called South Nutfield, so nowhere near the sea. And I think my dad got into it with a friend, a tiny little lake called Hedgecourt near Gatwick Airport. And then my mum got into it, and then obviously as a kid, she get dragged along. And I think I was probably only about 8 at the time. And believe it or not, I absolutely hated it. My sister, who's a couple of years older than me, she quite liked it. You know, she was, went with the flow. But I was the kid in the front of the boat crying her eyes out, absolutely petrified. And it's probably until I was about 10, and we went on holiday. We went on a sunsail holiday, actually, to Greece. So obviously a little bit warmer, a little bit sunnier. And I think there was a whole variety. We did 1 week dinghy sailing and then 1 week on a yacht. And there was a whole variety of boats to mess around with, obviously loads of kids and stuff. And that was kind of the turning point for me. I think up until then I had a fear of capsizing, where the boat tips over. And we just spent the whole time, to be honest, capsizing boats, swimming and all that side of things. And that got me over my fear. And then I remember sort of coming back and doing junior helm week at the club, absolutely loving it. Commandeering our family topper, that became mine. And I just got into racing. I remember mum and dad saying to me, why don't you have a go at the club race? Did my first club race and just did really well, apparently. I'd beaten quite a few of the top members in the club, obviously beat my parents, so that was a big tick in the box. And it kind of just grew from there, really. And we were really lucky that the Commodore at the time at a sailing club was very proactive, and there was a couple of us that were, doing well at sailing, and he was really good at kind of making sure we got opportunities and pushing us forward. And and gosh, in those days it was called Centre of Excellence, which was now the RA zone squads, and he made sure we got onto those, and then it progressed, and we ended up on the RYA program and the youth squad and stuff. And interestingly enough, I grew up with Simon Hiscox, who is a silver and bronze medalist in a 49er class. So silver in Sydney, bronze in Athens, and the two of us grew up sailing together on little Hedgecourt with Crawley Mariners near Gatwick Airport. So it's amazing kind of how things turn around. And I think we were really lucky with the Commodore of the club at the time. Just I think seeing our potential and making sure it wasn't wasted, and that we had opportunities to progress.
I was laughing as you were talking there, not at you, with you very much. My last guest that I recorded with, it's now out, Robbie Phillips, pro climber. People assume that you always loved the sport that you did. And Robbie likes to tell them how, the first time he went rock climbing, he actually hated it. Thought it was really boring, just wanted to go inside and mess around, and doesn't like camping, didn't finish Duke of Edinburgh's award because he got cold and wet and his expedition didn't enjoy it. So people assume that like these journeys are all amazing. Michael Phelps didn't like putting his face in the water when he first started swimming. And so with Helena sitting in the front of the boat crying because was it cold and wet? Was it miserable? Was that what it was you didn't like?
God, this sounds awful, and hopefully my mum and dad won't hear this podcast, but I think it was like, I don't think I really trusted them. I mean, the boat that we had wasn't really it wasn't kind of the most perfect family boat. It was quite unstable. It was an enterprise, and they have a habit of doing what we call the death roll downwind. So I think that sums it up in one word, doesn't it? The death roll. And I don't know, I just remember just feeling quite, as soon as the wind got up, I remember just feeling really quite scared, and little white knuckles hanging on for grim death in the front of this enterprise. And I think, it was that fear of capsizing. I just, for some reason, thought something bad was going to happen, and actually all that happens is you just get a bit wet, and obviously in this country a bit cold maybe, which is where I think Greece and the warm water, easing it in, that made the big difference, I think.
I was laughing again. You've reminded me of a story many years ago. The first day I ever went sailing many, many years ago, I would have been under probably 5 at oldest in Thailand on a Hobie cat. And my dad had told me, whatever you do, don't let go of the grab handles on the catamaran. I was like, okay, fine. And my brother capsized the boat with both of us, with all 3 of us on it. And my dad was looking up and seeing me hanging from this handle way above the water, nowhere near it, hanging on for grim death. Because I'd been told not to let go. And he likes to tell us, so, well, you did listen to the instruction. Eventually I decided to let go because I needed to like help them get the boat round and stuff. But yeah, the image is same image. Okay, right.
Oh, I love it.
The other parallel with Robbie Phillips was that he also had a life-changing trip to Greece, where he went to Greece and suddenly it was much warmer and more enjoyable and so on. So I find that a fascinating parallel. What was it about sailing, I guess, on that trip that came together for you? What was it about sailing that you loved?
I think, I think I realised actually it was a lot of fun. And I mean, the weird thing about the whole capsizing, I was a good swimmer. So it wasn't like I couldn't swim or anything, and I loved swimming. And I think it was just realising the fun aspect to it and how much fun it can be. And also I think it's that freedom, isn't it? That, you can go out in an oppie, you can go out in a toppie, you can go out in your own boat without your mum and dad. It's a bit like, I suppose it's a bit like riding your bike for the first time without mum and dad there or holding on to you, or it's that freedom. And you're in charge of your own boat, your own vehicle in a way. And I think that was really appealing as well. It was that independence and that freedom of being able to just go off with some other kids in our own boats. Mum and dad are doing their own thing. They might be out sailing, or they're on the beach or in the bowl or something like that, and it's like you just got that freedom to just go off and explore.
For the benefit of the listeners who aren't watching you right now, the joy in Helena's face is amazing. Just the passion for that real sense of independence. And you're dead right. Cyclists always say the same thing, that first bike, that freedom to go off and do things and, yeah, to do it for yourself maybe. Okay. So you obviously loved it so much that you wanted to keep doing it. And you then decided you were going to try and qualify for the Olympic Games. What was the journey from messing about in Greece to trying to qualify for the Olympic Games?
Well, interesting enough, I guess the journey actually started before then, because I remember watching my first Olympic Games on TV. It might have been the LA Games, I can't remember now. But I remember it was only probably about 6 maybe, and just being so inspired. And it was the likes of Steve Cram, Steve Ovett, and I think I just remember kind of thinking, I really want to do that. And obviously at that point I didn't sail, so I'm not sure what sport I thought I was going to go to the Olympics in. But there was definitely that drive from a really young age and that aspiration around the Olympics. So then when I started sailing and kind of realised actually I might have, a bit of talent at this. This could be the sport. That was kind of the driver, really. And, I guess small steps. The RA have an amazing youth programme. So it was a case, right, I want to get into youth squad first and then kind of progress from there. And then ultimately have a go, trying to get into the Olympic team and go to Olympic Games. So, yeah, from a really young age, even before I started sailing, there was definitely that drive and desire to try and compete in Olympic Games.
Yeah, it's really interesting that it started so early, and it's fascinating. The more conversations I have like this, how often it was an early experience of watching games that kind of led people to want to go to one, even if you didn't yet know which sport it was going to be in. It's like Eddie the Eagle, isn't it? He was trying to find a sport that he might be able to go to the Olympics in.
Yeah, I think I was a bit similar in a way. And I think, I know we'll chat about London, a bit later on, but I think what I loved about obviously having a home games was, and so, the British public, so getting behind it was, I think it just showed how many different sports there are out there, especially to, the kids and stuff. You don't, it's not just about netball, football, hockey, the traditional sports that are played at school. There's gymnastics, there's fencing, there's some really interesting, really taekwondo, really different sailing, different sports out there that you might, as a kid at school, you might think, oh, I'm rubbish at sport. You're not. There's going to be a sport out there you're gonna love, and I'm sure you're going to be good at that. And I think that is the beauty of kind of the Olympics. But I think, having a home games, that really kind of got everyone fired up. And I think more people probably watched than normally would. And yeah, just brilliant, showcasing all the different sports that are out there that you can do.
Oh yeah, no, totally. I just, for me, I always get excited when I think about Olympic sport. It's different if you've been to one, but I think just, yeah, an amazing spectacle for the world, I think. So you had a couple of attempts to qualify for the Olympic Games. Can you tell us a bit about those attempts?
Yeah, so I went through the youth program. So I moved into the board 20 class, and then when I got too old for that, so kind of turned 18, I delayed actually moving into the 470, which was the Olympic class, just because I wanted to go to uni, and I felt if I made the switch too soon, I was going to do a half-hearted attempt at getting my degree and also doing the Olympic campaign, because at that moment in time, lottery funding didn't exist, so it was very much in sailing. It was incredibly hard to get sponsorships, so it was about having a good job, normally within the industry, because then you might have a sympathetic boss that would let you off to have the time to go to the regattas and stuff. So I was kind of very conscious of, right, I need to make sure, get good degrees so I can get a decent job so I can actually fund and pay for my campaign. And so basically graduated, jumped into the 470, and I was just, my timing was impeccable. I was just so lucky. Literally, lottery funding started up then. And I was lucky enough at the Europeans to qualify for the funding. And it just kind of took off from there. And for us as a sport, the lottery funding was massive, because it meant that we could finally be full-time athletes, which we hadn't been able to do before. We had to have a 9-to-5 job to pay for your campaign, which meant you just weren't getting the time on the water. And you just could see the results from Atlanta to Sydney, just the difference, the number of medals that we won in sailing. We went from one of the least performing sports to the top performing sport with cycling and rowing. Again, two sports that massively benefited from the lottery funding. So, but yeah, Doug, as you said, I never quite managed to get there. And sailing's quite a tricky one, where only one team per class per country can qualify for the games. So let's take, I spoke about the 470, which is what I was sailing at the time. I think there were six teams competing for that one spot. So you enter into a trials process, which is brutal, because you've spent 3 years working together as a squad, to then you enter into trials and suddenly your teammate is now your worst enemy, because they could be the ones that stop you going to the games. So we entered into the trial process. Unfortunately, I was second in the trials both times, which there's being second quite hard, and obviously didn't actually get to compete at the Olympic Games, which was a shame, but hey ho.
I'm really interested. Obviously, really, as you say, really difficult that you train with people for 3 years, and then suddenly, right at the end, you're like, yeah, we're here to beat each other. How do you kind of make sense of that? So because you obviously know that's going to be the case at the outset. How do you kind of create relationships, I suppose, where you're working together? Because you need to work together in sailing, right? You need more than one person on the water to make it realistic for racing and practice and so on. But then balancing that with the fact that, but I'm also trying to beat you. How do you reconcile that, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, it is really hard, to be honest. And I think the really important thing with making the squads work, obviously in those kind of the first 3 years, is everybody needs to bring something to the table. So everybody needs to share, and difficulties happen when you feel there's maybe a particular team that's taking and not giving. So that, it has to be, you really do have to build up that trust and that sharing environment. And just kind of, and I think it's about that self-belief and backing yourself of, okay, look, if we all go into the trials with the equal amount of knowledge, and just try and make it an even playing field, and then that last, that kind of 6 months when the trial's going on, okay, that's when we all just push in our own direction and try and come up with our own little gem that could make the difference. But definitely, I mean, I think, again, the RA do a really good job of encouraging squads and making you realise as a sailor, look, at the end of the day, God, this is probably going to sound awful. I think with the Olympics and Paralympics, it is about winning medals. And it's not necessarily about, take it, I've been to the Olympic Games or Paralympic Games. It is really about winning medals. And and UK sport are very much into that, and the RYA are. And I think they do drum it into you that if you're going to be good, if you want to be good enough to win a medal, you've got to work together, and you've got to work together as a squad. If you go off on your own, the chances of you winning a medal are going to be pretty slim. And actually, if you do go off on your own, the chances are the squad are going to overtake you anyway, because they're working together and they're sharing. You've got 6 teams sharing their knowledge and pulling together and testing different things. 6. Well, if it's a double-handed, 12 heads, are going to be better than 2. And they, and I think they do a good job of just, making you buy into it really, and realizing how powerful a squad, a British squad can be. And I think that's why we have such an amazing, we do have an amazing sailing team. The British sailing team is best team in the world. And, and I think it is because of that, because we do all work together. And again, we very much do, like the Olympic and Paralympic. We're not segregated. We are one big team. So that makes a huge difference.
I'm interested, the joy with which you talked about your early experiences of sailing and the passion that you kind of got for that. And then the contrast of that with, there's no denying it, the Olympics and Paralympics are about winning medals, right? And they're a great spectacle for people watching at home, but they are, from an athlete point of view, you're not there as a tourist, you're there to pick up medals, right? How much of that early joy was still there in those attempts at qualification?
I think it's got to be, if you're not enjoying what you're doing, then you probably ought to stop. Doug, you're absolutely right. It is, the Olympic and Paralympic environment can be really stressful at times. You have to get the results to stay on funding. There's always somebody nipping at your heels to get your spot on the squad. So you have to constantly be, on your game. You've got to get the results. If you stop getting the results, you're going to get dropped off funding, and then it's pretty difficult to get back on it. And so there is that pressure. And I think it is about obviously learning the skills to deal with the pressure. So the mindset is very, very important, so that you can deal with the pressure and almost, just put it to one side. But I think you've got to have that enjoyment. If you're not enjoying your sport, you're not going to perform. And I know the best races I've ever had are the races where I've got out, I've just enjoyed it, I've been happy, and the results just come. And probably the worst races I've had are when, I'm going out and I'm dreading it, and I'm feeling the pressure, I don't want to go. And funnily enough, they end up being the races that don't pan out too well. So, I think you've got to have, even though the pressure's there, the enjoyment for the sport always has to be the underlying factor.
Oh, thank you. I was just interested in, does one stop when you get to a certain level? But actually, in your case, it sounds like no, that was always kind of there. So, I should be really clear on the podcast at this point. You are a legitimate world level competitor competing in Olympic class boats, right? You then went on to compete at the Paralympics. How did that transition switch come to be? How did it come to be that you were offered that opportunity?
So, as I said earlier, I campaigned the 470, which is the Olympic class, for the 2000 Sydney Games, second in the trials and missed out going. So then did a second campaign for Athens, second in the trials, didn't get to go. And it was literally after they'd selected the team for Athens. My crew at the time, Jenny Healy, she was a physiotherapist, so she'd put work on hold to go full time. So she's like, right, look, I'm going to go back now and go back to my job and do physio again. And I can't remember just sort of standing going, God, what am I going to do now? Because the trouble is, this, I'm small, quite small, so I was very limited. So it wasn't the ideal thing. Would have been possibly for me to just try a different class, single-handed class. But I was too small to sell laser radial, just not heavy enough, too small. So I was always going to be a 470 helm and nothing else. And I think there was part of me that was kind of like, I don't know if I can do another 4 years in the boat. I was, to be honest, I was feeling a little bit stale. And it was literally at that moment where I was pondering what on earth to do, when actually the ROA approached me and said, would you consider switching into the 2.4 metre, which is a Paralympic class? And to be really honest, Doug, I had very little knowledge of the Paralympics. I hadn't really heard of them, didn't really have much awareness. And for me, it was quite a tricky decision, because obviously, as I said to you, my aspiration's always been the Olympics. And I remember like talking to Jen, my crew, and she's just like, just go for it. And my family, my mum and dad and my husband Steve, were just like, well, you've got nothing to lose. Why don't you try it? If you don't like it, then, just come back and rethink and maybe go back into the 470. But, maybe give it a go. And I think the other thing that was quite strange for me was, I guess I've grown up not really thinking of myself as being disabled, because there's nothing that I can't do apart from give you the thumbs up. Apart from that, there's not really anything I can't do. So I've never considered myself as being disabled, and I'd always grown up sailing kind of able-bodied boats, toppers, 420s, 470s. So again, it was that weird moment of like, it sounds strange, but almost admitting that, okay, I guess I am disabled. I have got a disability. And again, to be honest, initially I thought, well, I don't think I'm actually going to qualify for the Paralympics. I don't think I'm disabled enough, because I was thinking I've been sailing able-bodied boats, been doing an Olympic campaign, they're not going to let me in. And you have to go through a classification process, and it's normally, the classifiers are normally physios that have been trained up in doing the classification. So you basically go through a process to decide, whether you are disabled or not enough to be eligible for the Paralympics. So I went through the process, and it's crazy. I was more than I thought. So the point system. There's a point system in sailing, there is, and I think in the other sports. I think you'll be aware, like the 100 meters. There's about 5 different races within the 100 meters, isn't there, or to do with the different disabilities. And in sailing, what happens is there's a point system. So the most disabled you are, you're a 1-pointer, and the least disabled you are, you're a 7-pointer. I assumed I would have to, definitely be 7-pointer, and I actually came out as a 6-pointer. So, so I kind of more than kind of qualified for it. And I remember doing my first event in Miami. So, but I was very familiar with Miami, because obviously I've been there in the 470 a lot, and it was part of the World Cup series. And not really helped by the ROA that kept telling me I was going to go there and smash it. But I did turn up, and I did turn up with a certain amount of arrogance, I think, of like, I am going to smash this. And I didn't at all. I think I finished 5th. And it was a real eye-opener for me, because it was, well, either I'm obviously not that good, or actually these guys are very good. And you start finding out a bit more, and realise, a lot of my competitors have been really good laser sailors, and like me, campaign themselves at Olympic level, and either then had an accident, or Heiko, he's missing his lower arm, but he'd always, like me, just grown up sailing lasers and campaign lasers and stuff. So suddenly realised actually I was sailing against some really good sailors. Damien Seguin from France, he's just done the Vendée Globe. He's just competed in the Vendée Globe, and just finished 7th. Which is pretty amazing. So I think it just sort of puts out there the level of quality that these guys, had. And, but it was the best decision I ever made. Looking back, absolutely the best decision I've ever made. And it came just at the right time, really.
Yeah, it's probably worth us just putting a pin in something for the listeners. You may have noticed that Helena was talking there about a series of male competitors. I'm right in saying that in Paralympic sailing, there are no male and female categories. There's just Paralympic sailing. Is that right?
Yeah, yes, certainly in the 2.4 meter class that I competed in, yeah, we all compete together. Whereas the 470, it's just recently changed with the Olympics, but when I was competing, it was split. So you had the women's 470 class and the men's 470 class. So when I was sailing the 470, I was only racing against women, whereas when I switched into 2.4, it was predominantly men, because there was only myself and Megan Pascoe, also from Great Britain. We were pretty much the only two girls on the circuit, so yeah, it was a very male dominated class. And then the other class within the Paralympics was the sonar, and again just mixed. So sonar is a 3-person boat, and yeah, there was no rules and regs of how many females or males you had to have on board. It was more down to that was where the points really counted. So with the 2.4, it's quite a special little boat actually, that it's so I guess you can adapt it to your disability. So one pointers would race against 7 pointers. It didn't matter what your disability was. It was an even playing field, and we have an open world. So it's a big class. It's a big able-bodied class in Scandinavia. And the open world, we'll have about 100 boats there, of which probably maybe 30 sailors are disabled. And so you're racing against all the able-bodied guys, and 9 times out of 10, there'll be at least 5 Paralympic sailors in the top 10, and quite often winning it, or in the top 3. So it just shows you it's an amazing little boat, how, it's such an even playing field. But certainly the 2.4 meter, which was the one I sailed, it was, male and female, crack on, get on with it, even playing field. Yeah, and it's an amazing little boat for that.
I love that, just how even and how level playing field you describe that as being, and probably a lot of people just aren't aware of like how highly competitive that kind of sailing is, given that it was full of people who'd been legitimately campaigning to be Olympians. They were not like beginners. They knew exactly what they were doing. They were legitimate athletes. I wonder if we can fast forward a couple of years. So you then went to London, home games, as a Paralympic sailor. I wonder if you could tell us about your London experience.
London. What can I say? What are the chances of having the opportunity to compete at home games in your lifetime, and then to come away with a gold medal as well? It definitely doesn't get any better than that, I have to say. And it was, looking back, it was just one amazing journey. And I was really lucky to have a really good kind of coaching support network, and also a really great sports psychologist as well. That there was a lot of pressure around London, particularly being a home games, and I worked really hard with Ben Shell, who was our sports psychologist at the time, of just developing that mindset and the coping mechanisms with dealing with kind of the pressure and blocking out, going into my little bubble. So we're pretty strict with routines and processes. But gosh, going into those games, there was the usual suspects up for winning the medal. So there was 4 of us. So myself, Damien Seguin from France, who I've mentioned earlier, Heike Kroger from Germany, and Thierry Schmitter from Holland. And the 4 of us have been battling out for blooming years, at world championships and previous games, and it was always kind of us usual suspects at the front. And so my expectations going into London was that it was going to be a full-on scrap, a full-on fight throughout the week, and it would probably come down to the last race, one to decide who was going to get the medals, and then kind of what colours they were going to be. And I had I think what helped was I had a really good start to regatta, so I got some solid results on the board right at the beginning, and it kind of just went from there. And I think, again, Ben and I had worked really hard on just keep doing what you do. If it's working, don't change it. If it's not broken, don't fix it. And I think because I had that good start, it was okay. Just got to each day just go out there. It's another day, it's another race. Do your best, keep doing what you're doing, it's working. I was quick. I'd worked really hard with my coach. He'd really got me up to speed. And I remember kind of halfway through the regatta, I had an 11-point lead. And I remember being interviewed. You always had to go through the mix zone before you left the dinghy park, and talk to the press and stuff. And I remember being interviewed, and oh wow, you got an 11-point lead. How are you feeling? What are you thinking? And you must be really excited. Oh, you must be thinking about that gold medal. And it's like whoa. What I remember him saying. I remember the interviewer going, "What is the thing you're most scared of?" I was like, "What?" And I just thought, what a stupid question. So I just gave him a stupid answer. It's like getting eaten by a shark. I thought it warranted that kind of response. But again, I just said, I'm not even thinking about medals or anything. Just focused on tomorrow, the next race, getting my head down, just keep doing what I'm doing. Yeah, it's really nice to have that 11-point lead, but anything can happen. We've got another 5 races to go. Anything can happen. But I do remember kind of the night before the last race, and I was guaranteed silver, but I wasn't quite guaranteed gold. I didn't have enough of a point buffer to not have to do the last race. But I was in a position where Heiko, who was who was in the silver medal position, he had to win the last race, and I had to be 10th or worse. No, I had to be worse than 10th. So it was, I was thinking, it wasn't in the bag, but it was looking pretty good. I was going to have to really mess up to really cock it up. And yeah, I just remember that night, I couldn't sleep. I was so excited. And yeah, it was it was one of those things we start dreaming about, like the on the water celebrations you're going to have and all of that sort of stuff, which you shouldn't be doing. And if Ben had known, he would have scolded me badly. But then the unfortunate thing was, Doug, the next day, so literally the next day, last race, wake up, not a breath of wind on the water. And so going to the dinghy part, starts postponed, so we're hanging around. We had the athlete container, which was amazing. It had like beds, TV in it, like a little kitchen, and so we were kind of hanging out. I remember we were hanging out in there watching Top Gun when it got to midday, and they just decided the wind is just not going to come in, and that was it. They just no more racing. So I won my gold medal in the dinghy part, which was not how I expected to win it, and not what I visualized, certainly not that night before. And I suppose, and that's probably, if you said to me, do you have any regrets from London, I think it would be not having the opportunity to do that last race, and not having the opportunity to have had the on the water celebrations. Like, my family were all out there waiting on the water for us to come out and race, and we didn't go out. We're in the dinghy park. So I think that would be my one regret.
Oh, what a story. You had told me about the lack of wind on the last day, and I'd forgotten, and I'm really glad I'd forgotten. Yeah, just this image of you preparing for that race and for that moment and what it might feel like. And people who haven't watched Olympic sailing or Paralympic sailing, it's quite often they'll set off flares, that kind of thing, and it's kind of a big celebratory thing when people win medals and so on. And you didn't get it. You're in the dinghy park. How did you celebrate it?
Oh gosh. Well, we had a team meal that night, and then me and my husband, we'd actually moved down to Portland, partly because he'd actually got a job down there working at Sunseeker, but also kind of for the game. So we had a house literally just up, like 5 minutes up the hill from the Olympic Village, and our local pub was a pub on Chesil Beach, overlooking the sea, called the Cove. So we basically, after the team dinner, we just went there, and it was the best night ever. It was packed. All my family were there and friends, but then it was like the place to go. All the Aussies were there, and all the sailors were there. all the helpers and volunteers that had been running the racing. So it was just one massive party on the beach in the Cove pub. So that's pretty much kind of how it all. Yeah, that were the celebrations. It all happened there.
Okay, so we had this amazing experience in London, despite the small regret of not getting your moment on the water. You're Paralympic champion. What was the journey like from London into Rio?
I mean, it was really interesting because I remember, I think a lot of people just thought, well, that's it, she's going to retire now. And so many people said to me, gold medal home games, how does it get any better? And it doesn't, and I knew that, and I was honest with, like, well, it won't get any better. But it was weird because I was not ready to retire. I still had that hunger. I still wanted to compete, and I knew Rio was not going to be the same. And I think that, that was really important that I recognised that, it wasn't going to be the same as London. London was incredibly special, but I still had the drive. And actually, it was quite interesting. The campaign for Rio was better than the campaign for London. To be honest, it had to be, because the venue in Rio was so tricky. The tides were an absolute nightmare. Initially the RA tried to, do a tidal model using kind of computer software and all that stuff, but they just, you couldn't model it. It was too random, and then it would rain, and that would just throw everything out the window. So all the tidal studies had to be done manually by coaches. Graham Sunderland, who was an expert in tides, he wrote a book called Winning Tides, which mapped all the tides in the Solent. He was employed to go out there and study it. So first of all, the tides were pretty crazy and quite difficult to understand. Secondly, we were racing in the harbour, which meant you had to contend with Sugarloaf Mountain, the domestic airstrip, because they weren't going to cancel the planes, they were still going to be landing and taking off, and then all the high-rise buildings and all that sort of stuff. So it plays absolute havoc with the wind. The wind's just shifting and bending and doing crazy things around all these obstacles. And so I guess, very early on, I sat down with my coach and we had this discussion of like, there's going to be, it sounds a bit weird, but there's going to be an element of luck that comes into Rio. Way more, Portland and Weymouth, very straightforward. The tides were straightforward. You could predict it. The wind was very steady, especially sea breeze conditions and stuff. So a far more predictable venue. And so we just said, right, okay, we're going to need we need to have the fastest boat, and I needed to be in the best possible physical condition, but also mindset, because it was going to be pretty there's going to be some curveballs that it's going to be probably going to be a snakes and ladders regatta, where you are going to probably have a couple of results that just right down the pan just because of something that's happened. And I think the really big thing with Rio as well was the rubbish in the water, which was a real problem. Just unbelievable. Just carry a bag, flip-flops. Unbelievable. I thought at some point, I must be able to find a pair. There were so many flip-flops, and they'd all sit on the tide lines, and you'd just be like, and there'd be like things like dolls and just unbelievable, and the authorities, I think there was quite a lot on the news and stuff about it, and the authorities kept saying they'd clean it up and all that sort of stuff, and it had been cleaned up, but it hadn't. It was still pretty bad. And then on top of that, it wasn't just the rubbish, it was obviously the sewage as well, like the favelas, and it would rain and everything would wash down into the harbour. And so again, there was a real issue with potentially getting sick. And in the build up to Rio and training, some sailors did get really quite sick. So it was like, what on earth are we going to do to prevent that? And I had things like mouthwashes in my boat, hand sanitizer. It was almost like COVID all over again. It's like hand sanitizers, and just trying to do whatever you could to just not get any of the water in your mouth, because you knew it could be a bit of a disaster if you did. That would be your game's over. If you got sick, that would be it. So we put a lot of effort in, and it was brilliant, because my husband got very much involved. He's a yacht designer and a boat builder, and he got very much involved in building my boat for Rio. And we knew this boat had to be special, and it had to be, there's very strict rules around it, but there was certain, in terms of how well it was built and making it, a stiff boat is a fast boat. So making sure that the build process there was a lot of attention to detail that went into the build of the boat was key. So we actually flew out to Finland where the boats are built, and actually kind of built my boat with the guys in the factory, and actually were there and present and just watched over the process and just made sure that, the attention to detail was there to ensure that I just, had a really good boat. And then with my coach, we spent a lot of time fitting it out, putting the best systems on it that we could, and again, a lot of effort into the sail development program. And again, so fortunate that my coach was really experienced. Before he'd done his Olympic campaigns and then become a coach, he'd been a sail maker and a sail designer. So it's like, so he was there designing my sails, making my sails, and it was a really, really good campaign. A much better campaign actually than the one for London. And and again, every single time that you do a campaign, you learn something. You learn something that you're like, yeah, okay, next time we'll do that. And you always want, 4 years seems like a really long time, but you always run out of time. You never have enough time. So the journey to Rio was very well planned. And even my program, I remember early days of sitting down with my coach, and we worked backwards. We started at, there's the games, where do we need to be at this stage, and we actually we worked backwards. So we had a really well thought out program of what events I was going to do, training, all of that side of things. So yeah, a really good professional campaign and program.
I'm really interested to ask you this question, having asked another podcast guest this question about winning medals at multiple Olympic or Paralympic Games in your case. It was bronze in Rio, gold in London, but you've described a much more effective campaign. I'm wondering, you can't say which one you like more. How do you reconcile those two very different experiences, given that element of luck that I guess that played into Rio? How do you make sense of those two outcomes, I guess?
Yeah, it was interesting because with Rio, I actually led the whole week from start to finish. Going into the last race, it was very close. Don't get me wrong. I only had a 1 point lead this time, not like 10 points like I had in London. So and also I wasn't guaranteed a medal either going into that last race. So the pressure was definitely there. And the last race, I try not to remember. I try and wipe from my memory. So cut a long story short, I think pretty quickly after the start, I picked up a plastic bag on my rudder. And because I'm sailing a keel boat, I can't, with the 470 or a dinghy, you can just lift the centerboard up, lift your rudder up, get it off, clear it, crack on. With a keel boat, as you know, you're pretty much stuck unless you've got some options. You can try and reverse and try and hope it falls off, but there's that risk of it sort of drops and then you just sail straight back into it. It was, and as I said to you, all week my strength had been I was really fast, and suddenly this last race I am absolutely dog slow, and I kind of knew what the problem was, and it was just trying to keep it together and stay calm through that race. Of just you're just going to have to deal with this. You're just going to have to do your best and just get around the course. And God, I remember crossing the finish line and my coach coming up, and I basically had a massive, great big black plastic bin bag attached to my rudder, and I was absolutely devastated. I was absolutely devastated. It's funny because if you look at photos of me on the podium in Rio, I just look so miserable. And I think I wasn't, obviously, it was only 1 point ahead of Damien going into that race. So certainly not by any means guaranteed goal. But I think looking back, I just wanted a fair shot at it. I just wanted, and I think for me, again, that would be my regret from Rio, is that last race. I wanted it to come down to my sailing ability. So, if I'd ended up with bronze because I'd sailed badly and got the shifts wrong, actually I would find that a lot easier to accept than the fact that, no, it was because of a plastic bag. Because, it was like, okay, on that day in that race, I wasn't quite, Damon was better than me. And so was Matt, who ended up with silver. So so it's interesting and it took me a while. It really took me a while to sort of kind of get over it, I suppose. And now on reflection, I feel really fortunate to actually have a bronze medal from that games, because wow, it would have been so easy to have come away with nothing for the reasons that I spoke about earlier. There was definitely going to be an element of luck going into these. And Heiko, who won silver in London, he came away with nothing because, unfortunately, I think he picked up a plastic bag in 2 races, and that was it. Game over, no medal. So on reflection, I now actually value my bronze medal. I mean, my gold will always be special because of it being London and the home games, but now I do really value that bronze medal, which at the time I was just like, I perhaps didn't. But now, I look back and think it's not easy. It really isn't easy to win medals at, Paralympic Games. And actually, by Rio, there were more people competitive for the medals. Where with London, I spoke about 4 of us up for winning medals. I think there is about 7 or 8 sailors more than capable of coming away with a medal in Rio. So, the sailors themselves, I was suddenly competing against more. The competition had raised its game, put it that way, and I'd had to massively raise my game alongside them. So yeah, it's interesting because, oh gosh, of course I would have loved it to have been gold, but I think I'm now on reflection pretty proud that I can actually say I'm a double medalist. I'm actually quite proud to be able to say that, because it's not that easy. It's not that easy to do that. I mean, I think the good thing is, so with London, having won a medal in London, what is really useful is the winning formula. And one thing that I did after London was actually write down all the things. I wrote down why I thought I won gold in London, and wrote down all the things that I thought I had done well, because I think it's so easy. When things go badly, you tend to take a lot more time reflecting on, races, or, for me, Beijing, my first Paralympic Games, that was a disaster. And you tend to take a lot more time analysing those ones than you do when you do well. And you kind of so busy celebrating and having a great time, you kind of forget to reflect and actually go, why did I win gold? What did I do right? And I did make a conscious effort to write down and think about that, because it's like, okay, you've got the winning formula. Now you need to just take that with you into Rio. You're gonna need to tweak it, because the venue's different. Your competitors are catching you up, they're nipping at your heels, but you've got somewhere to start from, which is massive. I think you've got a really good starting point. So yeah, I mean, I wouldn't switch my gold medal from London for anything. But I think I do value now my bronze from Rio.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. And you've forced me to reflect upon something that Frances Houghton said when we had her on the podcast. I asked her how long it was before she felt pride at her second silver medal in Beijing. And she thought about it. And if you've listened to the recording, she says, I don't think I ever did feel proud of that medal. And it was really fascinating. Like years and years and years later, actually just still didn't, like, we should have won gold. We were going to win gold. We just didn't execute our race properly. And you think at some point people will feel proud of those incredible achievements. Olympic silver medal, like, doesn't come easy. But actually she didn't. In her last games, when she won silver with the women's 8, she absolutely did feel really proud of that achievement. But yeah, really interesting. Olympic silver medal, incredible achievement, but it wasn't. It was something she never felt proud of. So I'm really pleased that you got to a place with your bronze medal, plastic bag and all, that you felt proud, feel proud of that achievement. I'm really, really interested, just zooming into a different part of what you've been up to over the years. You then moved into some coaching. What I'm really fascinated to find out about in terms of your coaching is, given your journey and everything you went through, and people didn't even know you had a disability kind of thing, and everything you've learned in your campaigns and the plastic bag and everything that went with that, how would you describe your approach to coaching others?
Gosh, I guess along my journey, my sailing journey, sort of as I've got towards sort of the latter years and kind of thinking about what next, I've looked back and thought, gosh, I've just had the most amazing journey and the most amazing experience. And I think because of that, I really want to give back into our sport, which is why, coaching just appeals to me so much. And I do feel, and at the moment I'm very much coaching juniors, and I absolutely love it, because I think I see them as little sponges, they just want to absorb as much information as possible. But I think one of my strengths, and it didn't come until later in life, was developing that winning mindset. And I see it with my juniors that even at this age, and some of them are only, 10, 12, 13, there is that pressure that they're putting on themselves. And, and they perceive it as like, I got to do well, I got to do well for mum and dad, and, and I've got to do well for my coach. And it's like, no, you don't. And then they're putting this pressure on themselves. And I really want to kind of help and support them with enjoying, just forget about all of that. Just go out, forget about the results, just go out and enjoy it. You're so young, just go out and enjoy it, and just help them kind of with their emotions and getting the most out of the sport, and just helping them, improve their skills, but at the same time, keeping that fun element in there and making sure that they enjoy their racing. And and I think it's a tricky one, because you could wrap them up in cotton wool, and I don't think that helps them at all, because unfortunately life's not fair, the world isn't fair, no one plays a fair game. And I think and sometimes the best way to learn that is actually through sport, and there are going to be winners and there are going to be losers. And normally what I've found, and certainly I found myself, was, yes, absolutely, to do really well in sport, you do need a certain amount of talent, but talent only gets you so far. You've got to have that drive and that commitment and determination. And I've certainly along my sort of sailing careers, seen sailors that have been way more talented than I have, but when it got tough, they just gave up. And it's those other skills I think are so important. And I think that's one of the things I want to get across to my junior sailors is, don't worry about how you're doing at the moment. The skills will come with practice. Yes, you might have to practice more than Johnny over there, because he may be a little bit more talented than you, but that doesn't matter, because that practice, you can do that. It's those qualities of the dedication and commitment and sticking at it there, and the passion, that they are the real ones that you almost got to have naturally within you. That never give up attitude, and that not being scared to fail, not being scared, realizing that you're gonna, you've got to, sometimes you've got to fail to learn. That's how you're going to learn and get better, because you've got to push the boundaries, you've got to explore, and sometimes you're going to get it wrong, but that's absolutely fine, because that's how you learn. And I think it's those sort of areas and those qualities that I really want to help kind of through my coaching, and certainly with the junior sailors and the groups that I'm involved with at the moment. That's what I really want to help them with, and help them understand.
Oh wow, there was a lot in there. There's always a point on every podcast where I asked everyone to listen back to the last couple of minutes. I would very much encourage people to listen back to those last couple of minutes. There was absolutely tons in there. I was going to ask you advice for young athletes, and you've kind of done it there. So I now have the very difficult task now of trying to get a little summary on this incredible conversation before we close it off. Okay, where do we start? Because we kind of finished where we started, so we'll kind of maybe run this through twice, I suppose. That independence, that joy of sailing, like that feeling of mum and dad not being there, although it did start with you not really enjoying it at all. I think that's incredible. I really noticed you describing that, how you reconcile the challenge of people you train with day in, day out, who you're then going to compete against, and this idea of, you talked about everyone needs to bring something to the table, and you need to build that trust over time. If you're not enjoying it, you probably need to stop. Something you said earlier, and your best races were when you were happy and you enjoyed it, and that's kind of what you were just talking about there with young people. I love this idea. You grew up not thinking of yourself as disabled, so it was a bit of a weird moment you to recognise that you have a disability, you're not a disabled person. And I love that. I think this should be the name of the podcast. Only thing I can't do is give you a thumbs up. I think that's just great. And then obviously your incredible experiences going through that gold in London and that more challenging bronze in Rio, and those two little regrets, not getting to the final race and then having the final race in Rio that didn't quite go to plan and the way it was. And then just that final piece we finished on, really the supporting that, developing a really good mindset in young people that you'll race better if you're enjoying it. And that thing I've written down, that well-used maxim, hard work beats talent, when talent doesn't work hard. So you can have lots of, I guess, gifts to what you're doing or a predisposition to being good at something, but it's actually the ability to stick with it when it gets a bit tough that really matters. And I just hope those kids that you're working with realise how fortunate they are to have someone like yourself with all your experiences and everything you've been through, working with them day in, day out, and actually doing a lot more than just teaching them how to sail, teaching them how to be good people and how to work hard and all the lessons you've learned along the way. So just, thank you very much. People are going to want to follow you and keep an eye on you and find out what you're up to and probably, just maybe have another conversation with you. Where can they follow you?
So I've got a website, very simple, www.helenalucas.com. So that's a pretty simple one. I'm also on Twitter and on Facebook, so you can follow me there. Yeah, and probably my website's a great place to go and see what I'm up to and see what new challenges I'm thinking up of.
And I'm right in saying you're involved with the Magenta project as well. Is that something that you're involved with just now?
Yes, absolutely. I'm an ambassador for the Magenta project, and I'm also a mentee on the project as well. So no, mentor. I have a mentee. Sorry, I'm a mentor, and I'm really enjoying that. It's the first time I've ever really done any mentoring, and I'm finding it invaluable. I'm very lucky with my mentee. I think she's incredibly inspirational. So we've got a brilliant relationship kind of going there, and I'm very much enjoying that. And the Magenta project is obviously very much about getting women on the water, sailing, but also into the industry, into boat building, into yacht design, all sorts of stuff like that. So very much kind of getting women into the sport and into the industry.
Great, thank you very much. I will put the information in the podcast description for anyone who wants to get Helena's details and follow what she's up to with the Magenta project as well. Everyone there was absolutely bucket loads in there. I really hope you just enjoyed hearing the stories of how she came to do what she did, but also some of those really key bits of learning that she's picked up along the way. Do keep an eye out for future podcasts and hit subscribe to make sure you don't miss out. And everyone, please stay safe.